the autumn of 1955, a family portrait captured a poignant scene. Two young boys, attired in their school garments, visiting their mother in a hospital setting. Their expressions, tinged with bewilderment, hinted at the confusion surrounding the presence of cameras. The elder boy, at 11 years of age, and his younger brother, 8, did not yet grasp the full gravity of the situation. All they understood was that their father was no longer present and that their mother was the cause. These two youths, Woody and Jimmy Woodward, would dedicate their lives to escaping the shadow of a harrowing event that unfolded in a Long Island hallway. Tragically, neither would succeed. But before we delve into their fates, we must revisit the genesis of this narrative, tracing it back to a young woman from Kansas, armed with little more than her striking appearance and unwavering resolve, and the pivotal night that irrevocably altered the course of everything. This woman, hailing from Pittsburgh, Kansas, was born Angeline Lucille Cray on the 12th day of December, 1915. Pittsburgh, Kansas, a modest town, offered scant opportunities for a girl brimming with her distinctive brand of ambition. Her father, a former streetcar conductor and retired military officer, and her mother, a schoolteacher who was, by all accounts, one of the most educated individuals in southeastern Kansas and among the first in her county to achieve a master's degree from the University of Kansas, were divorced when Angeline was still quite young. In the wake of this separation, she began a subtle internal metamorphosis, a common practice for those from small towns who envision their futures far beyond their current horizons. She attended Kansas City Junior College for a single year before making a decision shared by many ambitious young women of her era. She relocated to New York City in 1937 at the age of 21. Adopting the name Anne Eden, she signed it crisply on her application to the John Robert Powers Modeling Agency, the most esteemed establishment of its kind in the city at that time. Powers represented the epitome of feminine elegance, gracing the pages of Vogue and gracing national magazine covers, precisely the world Anne aspired to conquer. She was accepted, signed, and soon secured supplementary work as a radio actress, a medium through which most Americans in the late 1930s consumed their entertainment, and one that celebrated a particular presence and vocal quality. By 1940, a national poll had declared her the most beautiful woman in radio, a significant recognition that also underscored the era's tendency to categorize women primarily by their physical attributes. Anne embraced this acclaim and continued her pursuits. To augment her income, she performed as a showgirl in fashionable Manhattan nightclubs, a profession that occupied a peculiar social stratum, considered glamorous enough to attract affluent men, but not entirely respectable in the eyes of their mothers. It was at one such establishment, Fifi's Monte Carlo on East 54th Street, that Anne's life took an unforeseen turn, one she was nonetheless prepared to navigate. William Woodward, Sr., entered the club. A figure of immense influence in New York, he served as the chairman of the Central Hanover Bank and Trust, a man so deeply entrenched in the city's old money establishment that his name was uttered with an unconscious deference. He was also considerably older than Anne, married, and evidently captivated by her. The precise nature of their connection has long been a subject of conjecture. Whether Anne became his mistress, for how long, and what precisely he offered her remain debated. What is beyond dispute, however, is what transpired subsequently. In 1942, William Woodward Sr. introduced Anne to his son. William Woodward Jr., known universally as Billy, was 22 years old. stood at 6 feet 3 inches, possessed a natural handsomeness that suggested effortless charm, and was widely regarded by society publications as America's most eligible bachelor. He was a graduate of Groton and Harvard, had served in the Navy during the war, earning a Purple Heart after a torpedo attack on his vessel. Upon his father's eventual passing, he was slated to inherit not only the family's banking fortune, but also the Bear Stud Farm in Maryland, one of the nation's oldest thoroughbred horse operations, renowned for producing 3 Kentucky Derby champions. By all conventional measures of American success, Billy Woodward was an exceptional prospect. He was immediately drawn to Anne. This attraction was genuine and perhaps amplified by his mother's profound disdain for her. Elizabeth Ogden Crider Woodward, known as Elsie, was a prominent figure in New York society, hailing from a family so established that 3 sisters from her generation gained renown simply for being the Crider triplets. Elsie's world was characterized by rigid boundaries, and Anne Eden from Pittsburgh, Kansas, a woman who had danced in nightclubs and modeled in advertisements, existed far outside those confines. When Billy declared his intention to marry Anne, Elsie's disapproval was absolute. Nevertheless, they married. The ceremony took place on March 6, 1943, at St. Luke's Memorial Episcopal Church in Tacoma, Washington. The choice of venue seemed deliberate, situating the event as geographically distant from Elsie's social circle as possible. Anne was 27, Billy 22. She had just become Mrs. William Woodward, Jr., and the doors to New York's most exclusive drawing rooms had, in theory, opened for her. However, the inhabitants of those circles would spend the ensuing decade ensuring she remained acutely aware of the chill emanating from within. New York's high society operated on an unspoken understanding. One's origins held greater significance than one's present status. Anne, having come from the wrong place, found herself excluded from invitations, overlooked at gatherings, and the subject of hushed conversations. Elsie's disapproval was conveyed with a masterful blend of elegance and devastating effect. Anne's strength lay in her tenacity. She observed the women around her, meticulously studying their attire, their speech patterns, their philanthropic endeavors, their artistic preferences, and the causes they espoused. She learned. She actively supported the Museum of Modern Art, the American Red Cross, and public television. Her collection of Chinese antiquities and haute couture eventually became so substantial that some pieces were acquired by the Metropolitan Museum of Art. By the late 1940s, she had gained entry. The doors that had been firmly shut against her had begun to swing open, not due to Elsie's concession, but because Anne had simply outlasted their indifference. She had cultivated an image befitting a woman whose name appeared in prominent society columns for all the right reasons. Yet beneath the veneer of sophistication, the marriage was unraveling. Both Anne and Billy engaged in extramarital affairs, their heavy drinking and their public arguments, which occurred with a frequency that caused discomfort even among their closest friends. In 1947, Billy formally sought a divorce. Anne refused. She had invested too much and endured too much to relinquish the life she had painstakingly constructed, and she understood that a divorce in their world, in that era, would mean forfeiting most of it. Thus, she held on. What remained unaddressed, at least publicly, was the impact of this tumultuous environment on the 2 boys growing up within it. Woody was born in July of 1944, and Jimmy in January of 1947. The household they inhabited was a grand, yet emotionally frigid and complex place. Their lives were set against the backdrop of the family's sprawling country estate in Oyster Bay Cove, Long Island, their Manhattan townhouse on the Upper East Side, the presence of governesses, formal meals, and horses. It was a world meticulously constructed for appearances, and it presented a flawless facade. However, by the mid-1940s, their parents occupied separate bedrooms and maintained a stringent control over their emotions, cloaking their private lives behind an impenetrable veil of propriety, leaving the two boys to navigate the complexities of their upbringing largely on their own. Then came Halloween night, 1955. Before we reach that fateful evening, it is worth pausing to consider the atmosphere within the Woodward household as the boys grew. The Long Island estate in Oyster Bay Cove encompassed 60 acres of meticulously maintained grounds, complete with tennis courts, stables, and a private swimming pool. The kind of property that, in the mid-1950s, represented the zenith of American private affluence. The Manhattan residence operated with the efficiency of a high-end hotel, staffed by governesses, tutors, and a dedicated team of domestic help. Woody and Jimmy were impeccably dressed, well-fed, received private tutoring, and were surrounded by the most luxurious manifestations of childhood imaginable. What they lacked was stability. Their parents had resided in separate bedrooms for years, and the public disputes were often eclipsed by more acrimonious confrontations at home. Anne had become reliant on prescription medications, including sleeping pills and stimulants, a common practice among women of her social standing during that decade, while Billy's consumption of alcohol was pronounced and noticeable. The boys absorbed these tensions, as children often do, silently and without the language to articulate their feelings. Woody, at 11, had developed the characteristic composure often seen in eldest children from troubled homes. Watchful, cautious, and already adept at maintaining a neutral expression. Jimmy, at 8, had not yet acquired these coping mechanisms. However, the evening of October 30th of that autumn was fraught with unease in Oyster Bay. A series of burglaries had been plaguing the estates along the north shore of Long Island. 2 nights prior, food and ammunition had been pilfered from the Woodwards' own property, locks had been tampered with, and footprints had been discovered on the grounds. The neighborhood was on edge. Both Anne and Billy had openly discussed the matter at dinner parties, and both were experienced hunters who kept firearms in their home as a matter of routine. On the 30th of October 1955, the Woodwards attended a dinner party hosted by Florence Tucker Baker in honor of the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. By all accounts, it was a convivial evening. Guests, who were later questioned about the atmosphere, recalled the couple as relaxed, even happy, though, as was typical at such events, considerably intoxicated by the time they departed. They arrived back at their Oyster Bay estate, which they affectionately referred to as the Playhouse, around 1 o'clock in the morning. Woody and Jimmy were asleep in their respective rooms. Anne and Billy bid each other good night and retired to their separate sleeping quarters. Both kept shotguns readily accessible, their minds occupied with thoughts of a potential intruder. 2 hours later, the family's spaniel, named Sloppy, began barking insistently at an open door. Anne heard the commotion, awoke, and proceeded into the darkened hallway, clutching her 12-gauge shotgun. In the dim light, silhouetted against the faint moonlight filtering through a window, she perceived a figure standing near the door to Billy's room. She fired twice. The first shot struck the wall. The buckshot from the second discharge ricocheted off the doorframe at an unexpected angle, and a single pellet struck the temple of the individual she had fired upon. The figure collapsed. Upon approaching, she realized with horror that it was Billy. The police arrived to find Anne cradling her husband's body, weeping uncontrollably. She immediately asserted that she had mistaken him for the prowler. Her lawyer, Sue Rosenblatt, arrived shortly thereafter, a detail that would later draw considerable scrutiny. At Rosenblatt's urging, Anne was transported to a Manhattan hospital for sedation, a measure that spared her from immediate interrogation for the subsequent 48 hours. The Nassau County prosecutor and the Oyster Bay chief of police personally oversaw the investigation of the scene, the victim's prominence necessitating the involvement of the highest echelons of local law enforcement. What transpired next was a testament to American society's capacity for absorption and concealment. In the days following the shooting, a man named Paul Worths was apprehended. Worths admitted to being on the roof of the Woodward property on the night in question, attempting to access a window when he was startled by the sound of gunfire and fled. His testimony largely corroborated Anne's account. Whether Worths received any compensation for his confession, or if Elsie Woodward's considerable social and financial influence was discreetly employed to facilitate a favorable outcome, was never definitively established, though speculation was immediate and persistent. 3 weeks after the shooting, Anne appeared before a Nassau County grand jury. After deliberating for 30 minutes, the jury concluded that no criminal act had been committed, ruling the shooting an accident. Life magazine heralded it as the shooting of the century. The story sent shockwaves through every stratum of American society. The nation's most eligible bachelor had been fatally shot by his wife, a woman whom his own family had consistently distrusted. The ensuing gossip was merciless. The prevailing sentiment within the very drawing rooms Anne had so assiduously sought to infiltrate was that she had acted deliberately, intending to kill Billy before he could divorce her and divest her of all she had acquired. While nothing was ever definitively proven and the grand jury had rendered its verdict, New York society delivered its own judgment, swift and irrevocable. Anne was ostracized. Within weeks of the grand jury's ruling, her name disappeared from every significant guest list. The telephones ceased to ring, invitations vanished. Elsie, though publicly defending her daughter-in-law to shield the family from a trial, made her private sentiments abundantly clear through other means. The two boys, Woody, then 11, and Jimmy, aged 8, were sent to boarding school in Switzerland. Elsie selected La Rosiaz, the most exclusive institution of its kind in Europe, a school boasting alumni that included royalty and heads of state, with tuition fees running into tens of thousands of dollars annually. It was a place where the children of the exceedingly wealthy were sent when their families deemed it necessary for them to be elsewhere. The boys, having slept through the fatal incident and witnessed nothing, would nevertheless spend the remainder of their lives profoundly affected by it. As they embarked on their transatlantic journey to commence their new lives at La Rosiaz, their mother began a period of exile that would last 20 years. She moved between Europe and New York, only to discover that no matter the distance she traveled, the story invariably preceded her. During the intervening years, Elsie Woodward stipulated the terms of Anne's financial arrangements. Anne was to receive an annual allowance of $500,000 from the estate, but she would have no control over the racing stables or the ancestral properties, which were designated to pass to the boys. She would reside temporarily with her mother-in-law at the Woodward mansion located at 9 East 86th Street on Manhattan's Upper East Side, before eventually relocating to Europe. Crucially, she was not to cause any further disruption. In return, the Woodward family would refrain from creating additional difficulties for her. It was not an arrangement designed for comfort. Indeed, comfort was not its intention. For the boys, La Rosiers proved to be an education in a distinct form of solitude. The scandal had followed them. The school was populated by children from prominent families, and such families were prone to conversation. They were the Woodward boys, which meant their father's fate was known, and opinions regarding their mother were readily available. Neither boy was ever provided with a clear explanation from anyone, not from Anne nor from Elsie, regarding the events of the night Billy died. The silence surrounding this subject was absolute, systematic, and profoundly damaging. Woody, the elder of the two, navigated his time at La Rosiers with an outward appearance of resilience. By many accounts, he was a composed and intelligent young man, intellectually curious, engaged with the world, and capable of forming and maintaining friendships. He graduated, returned to the United States, and enrolled at Harvard. He seemed to be forging a path, or at least that was the impression he conveyed. Jimmy, however, presented a different disposition from the outset. He was the more sensitive of the two, the one most deeply affected by the unexplained circumstances of his father's death. The questions he was unable to voice to anyone accumulated behind his eyes in a manner noticeable to others. At La Rosiers, he struggled. The school was beautiful and expensive, filled with the children of individuals who had socialized with his parents, and he did not fully belong there in the way Woody did. He eventually completed his studies, but the experience, the distance, the inexplicable absence of clarity, and the unspoken accusations that clung to the family name left an indelible mark. The subsequent trajectory of Jimmy's life, following his departure from La Rosiers, unfolded in a series of escalating misfortunes. He enlisted in the United States military and served in Vietnam, reportedly volunteering partly to remain near a friend who had been drafted. Tragically, this friend was killed in combat. Jimmy returned from the war a changed man, burdened by the profound psychological toll of combat, especially for young men already carrying significant emotional weight. He began to self-medicate, a common coping mechanism for his generation, seeking solace in whatever could quiet the incessant turmoil within his mind. He resorted to alcohol and hard drugs, becoming increasingly erratic and paranoid, at times convinced he was being watched and that his television was used for surveillance. He wrote lengthy, accusatory letters to his mother, penned under the influence of whatever he had been drinking that day, directly articulating his beliefs, that she had intentionally shot his father, that she was a murderer, and that his entire life had been tainted by her actions. Anne received these letters, read them, and did not always respond. When she did, the correspondence was strained and painful, reflecting the inherent difficulty of communication when the core question at the heart of a relationship remains fundamentally unaddressed. In 1972, Jimmy attempted to take his own life by jumping from a friend's apartment window. He survived, sustaining multiple fractures from the fall. He was hospitalized and spent time in a psychiatric facility. Anne visited him there. By several accounts, the visit was not conducive to healing. He reiterated the questions he had posed in his letters, but she was unable to provide him with the answers he desperately needed. She departed in tears. Throughout these trying times, Woody appeared to remain steadfast. He had graduated from Harvard, pursued a career in journalism, and worked for several years as a reporter for the New York Post. He developed a particular interest in the media itself, examining the operations of newspapers and magazines, their ethical responsibilities, and whether they were living up to them. In 1971, he collaborated with two other writers to co-found a publication named More, a journalism review that for several years fulfilled its founder's mission of subjecting major American media outlets to critical scrutiny at a time when such examination was particularly vital. He financed the venture with a portion of his inheritance and served as its publisher. By all accounts, More was a genuine achievement, becoming an influential and widely read journal within journalistic circles, respected by serious reporters. He also held the position of Deputy Superintendent for the New York State Department of Banking under Governor Hugh Carey. In 1978, he ran for the New York State Senate, but was unsuccessful. He was actively engaged in building a life for himself. However, time was running out for Anne. And when Anne's time expired, the fragile thread that had held Jimmy together finally snapped. Truman Capote and the final blow. Truman Capote had been observing Anne Woodward for years. He had encountered her in society and, seemingly quite rapidly, formed the opinion that she was guilty of murder, a belief he cultivated and embellished over time until it approached obsession. He had a moniker for her, Bang Bang. Within his social circle, where the exchange of whispered critiques about mutual acquaintances served as a form of social currency, this nickname was considered highly amusing. Capote had been working for years on a novel, Answered Prayers, which he described as his magnum opus, his unflinching portrayal of American high society from within. The characters were directly inspired by people he knew, thinly disguised, their secrets, scandals, and most painful moments rendered in print with the precise detail only an insider could provide. He had been releasing excerpts to Esquire magazine, each installment generating the very kind of explosive reaction he intended. In the autumn of 1975, Esquire was poised to release a new piece, a chapter titled Lacode Basque, 1965. This chapter featured a character named Anne Hopkins, depicted as a killer who had successfully evaded consequences for her husband's demise by asserting she mistook him for an intruder. This character lacked any subtlety. Her name was altered, yet everything else about her remained identifiable. Anne learned of the impending publication. The exact origin of this intelligence remains undetermined. It's unclear if she received an early copy, heard through contacts in the publishing industry, or was informed by a friend who had seen the proofs. What is confirmed is that in the period immediately preceding the magazine's release, she grasped its content and the repercussions it would have on her life. For 2 decades, she had lived with the aftermath of the shooting, enduring 20 years of ostracization, persistent gossip, closed doors, and the gnawing, perpetual humiliation of being perceived by those she cared about as the woman who had gotten away with murder. She had painstakingly constructed a semblance of a life from the fragments of her former existence. An allowance from Elsie, an apartment on Fifth Avenue, excursions across Europe, and younger companions met during her travels comprised this new reality. It was a life, albeit not the one she had so fiercely striven to build. On the evening of October 9, 1975, she ingested cyanide within her Fifth Avenue residence. Her body was discovered the following morning. No message indicating her intentions was found. She was 59 years old. The Esquire issue had yet to hit the newsstands. Elsie Woodward, who had outlived both her son and, subsequently, her daughter-in-law, reportedly made a statement regarding Anne's passing that was both chillingly detached and entirely consistent with the milieu in which both women had operated. She remarked that Anne had fatally shot her son and that Truman had now caused Anne's death, adding that she supposed they no longer needed to concern themselves with that particular issue. Yet, other anxieties persisted. There remained two young boys, both of whom had lost their father at the tender ages of 11 and 8. They had been sent to a boarding school in Switzerland without any explanation and had grown up under the immense shadow of an unanswered question, now facing the profound loss of their mother to a tragedy that the entire world was about to read about in a magazine. The worst was yet to unfold. Jimmy. In September of 1978, less than 3 years after Anne's death, James Woodward, at the age of 31, fell from the 9th floor of the Mayfair House Hotel on Park Avenue in Manhattan. He did not survive. The trajectory of Jimmy's life in the 3 years following his mother's death is one of the most distressing aspects of this narrative. He had already been teetering on the brink prior to her passing, grappling with the Vietnam years, addiction, a suicide attempt in 1972, and subsequent hospitalization. He had been trying, in his own way, to regain stability. His correspondence with his mother had eventually ceased, or at least the most desperate periods had subsided. Her death, however, severed whatever tenuous anchor had been maintaining his fragile equilibrium. He had served in Vietnam alongside men who perished. Upon his return, he found his mother vilified across the nation's press. He wrestled with his own addiction, his paranoia, and his profound inability to find any solace regarding his family's circumstances. And now, his mother was gone. The Capote excerpt was poised to become ubiquitous. Every article discussing answered prayers would inevitably reference the Woodward name, and each mention would reopen the same wound that, in 31 years, had never been permitted to heal properly. The years between Jimmy's return from Vietnam and his demise in 1978 represent a period of desperate clinging, with his grip loosening incrementally with each passing season. He lacked a stable abode, drifting through the types of establishments frequented by individuals in his predicament. Inexpensive hotels, the residences of friends, and the fringes of a city indifferent to his renowned surname and the catastrophe it embodied. The inheritance from the estate was available. However, financial resources cannot mend the profound damage Jimmy had sustained. It could cover a hotel bill, but it could not provide an answer to the unspoken question. Jimmy had made a prior suicide attempt in 1972 and had undergone treatment in a psychiatric facility. Those who knew him recognized that his 1978 attempt, while devastating, was not entirely unexpected. What remains unknowable, and was never publicly discussed by the family, is the extent to which the publication of Capote's excerpt influenced his mental state in his final weeks. Nevertheless, the timing is impossible to disregard. His mother died in October 1975, directly in anticipation of the Esquire publication. His death followed in September 1978, as the media surrounding answered prayers continued its relentless cycle. He was born in January of 1947 into a world where his father was America's most eligible bachelor, and his mother was ascending to the most esteemed social circles in New York. He died at the age of 31, never having experienced the opportunity to simply be a person outside the shadow of the Woodward boy. He was interred in the Woodward family plot at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx beside his father, for whom he had never ceased to grieve, nor stopped blaming his mother for taking away. Woody buried his younger brother and persevered. For a time, it seemed he might navigate through. Woody. The concluding chapter of the Woodward saga belongs to William Woodward III, or Woody. His arrival on the scene took longer than Jimmy's, which, paradoxically, makes its eventual impact harder to comprehend. By all reasonable accounts, Woody had achieved something remarkable. He had grown up amidst one of the 20th century's most intensely scrutinized family tragedies, dispatched to a Swiss boarding school at the age of 11 without explanation, and raised under the Woodward name in a world that attached significant meaning to it. He had forged a life that, from an external perspective, appeared to be that of a functioning, accomplished adult. His accomplishments included Harvard, the New York Post, More magazine, state banking regulation under Governor Kerry, and participation in a political campaign. He married Lisa Schreiber in 1985 in Paris, a ceremony that Dominic Dunn's novel about the family had recently rekindled public interest in, coinciding with the release of The Two Mrs. Grenvilles in the same year. Woody and Lisa had a daughter named Elizabeth. To all outward appearances, he was doing well. He had engaged with journalists and researchers over the years regarding his family history, understanding that their story would perpetually shadow him. He had, for the most part, come to terms with this. Susan Brody, who dedicated 8 years to researching her book on the Woodward marriage, had a brief acquaintance with Woody. She described him as composed and thoughtful, a man who had processed his childhood experiences with a greater deliberateness than Jimmy. He had, or at least appeared to have, chosen not to be defined by the events that transpired on Long Island in 1955. However, cracks began to appear around the mid-1990s. The precise cause and timing of this breakdown are not entirely clear from the public record. The Woodward family maintained a staunch privacy around its members, even as the family name remained perpetually in public discourse. What is known is that his marriage to Lisa began to disintegrate, a process accompanied by what those around him identified as severe mental illness. By the time his wife initiated divorce proceedings around 1994, accounts described erratic and destabilizing behavior, indicative of the accumulated weight of decades finally exerting its pressure. The divorce was finalized. He lost regular contact with Elizabeth. The separation from his daughter appears to have been a blow that the earlier losses had left him particularly ill-equipped to withstand. Throughout his adult life, he had actively constructed a distance from the Woodward tragedy through his work, journalism, public service, and the discipline of being useful, competent, and present in the world. The divorce dismantled this carefully built structure. What remained beneath was the 11-year-old boy who had been placed on a plane to Switzerland in November of 1955, without anyone sitting him down to explain what had occurred. He had amended his will, bequeathing the majority of his estate, estimated at approximately $35 million, entirely to his daughter. By May of 1999, Woody Woodward, at the age of 54, was alone and at the end of his rope. On the 2nd of May, 1999, he jumped from the 14th floor of his Manhattan apartment. He was laid to rest in the Woodward family plot at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, the same hallowed ground where his father, Billy, had been buried in 1955, where his brother Jimmy had been interred in 1978, and where Anne herself, as per her wishes, had been placed in 1975. The entire family, in the end, together in the same plot. the woman who had fired the shot, and the two children who had lived their lives within the inescapable consequences of that fateful night, finally reunited in a cemetery in the Bronx. Dominic Dunn, who had chronicled the family's story for decades, offered a poignant reflection on Woody's death that resonated with the sense of finality many felt as the last chapter closed. He described Woody as a remarkable man who had endured an unspeakable ordeal, and he characterized it as a tragic end to a fated family. Elsie Woodward outlived them all. She passed away in 1981 at the age of 98, having witnessed the deaths of her son, her daughter-in-law, and both her grandsons, and having publicly stated, memorably, almost nothing of substance regarding any of it. Ultimately, what the Woodward children inherited from their parents was not wealth, though there was certainly an abundance of it. They inherited an unanswerable question, posed by a family that would never provide a resolution. Woody and Jimmy were in the house on the night of October 30th, 1955. They were asleep. They heard nothing. They spent the remainder of their lives wishing they knew what had transpired in that hallway, what their mother had perceived, what her intentions had been, whether it was the accident she had always maintained, or the crime that a significant portion of New York society insisted it had been. No one informed them, not Anne, not Elsie, not the grand jury, not the journalists who reported on the family over 5 decades. The question that had shattered their family in 1955 remained unresolved when Woody leaped from his window in 1999. It persists to this day. The narrative of the Woodward family has been recounted numerous times, in Capote's unfinished novel, in Dominic Dunn's The Two Mrs. Grenvilles, in Susan Brody's exhaustive 1992 investigation, and in the FX series Feud, Capote versus the Swans, where Anne was portrayed by Demi Moore. Each retelling grapples with the central question: did she know? Did she see Billy standing in that hallway and fire regardless? Or was it precisely as she always claimed, a terrified woman in the dark, reaching for a shotgun she had loaded due to a prowler on her property, and pulling the trigger before she could fully comprehend? The grand jury ruled it an accident. The rumors suggested murder. Both verdicts resided within Woody and Jimmy for the rest of their lives. Children cannot appeal a verdict of the heart. They cannot petition a court to retry what they feel to be true about their progenitors. They bear the verdict that aligns with their wound and carry it until they can bear it no longer. What is not disputed is this: both boys were in the house that night. Both slept through the events. Neither received a satisfactory explanation, and both, in their distinct ways and at their differing paces, were devastated by the silence. Anne Woodward had ascended as far and as diligently as any woman of her generation could. Emerging from Pittsburgh, Kansas, with nothing but her beauty and ambition, she had transformed herself into one of New York's most recognizable socialites. The night that ultimately destroyed her, the night the shotgun roared, the buckshot scattered, and Billy fell, also set in motion a chain of events from which she spent 20 years fleeing, a force that ultimately outpaced her. Her 2 sons bore the full cost of that night. They paid it in ways that were, for a considerable time, invisible to the world. In the amorphous grief of children who do not understand the source of their sorrow, in the peculiar cruelty of growing up famous for something their family did before they were old enough to consent to it. Wherever Woody and Jimmy went, the Woodward name preceded them. At La Rosie, among the children of the European and American elite, someone invariably knew. In New York, in newsrooms, In government offices, someone always knew. The knowing never ceased. And the not knowing, the profound, devastating uncertainty of what truly happened in that hallway, never resolved into anything a person could live with. Her 2 sons paid the full price of that night. Not all at once, that would have been almost a mercy by comparison. They paid it gradually, over decades, in the specific manner that children growing up amidst a family secret do. In nightmares, in addiction, in letters penned in darkness, in futile quests for peace that never quite materialized, in a final choice made by each of them from a window in New York, a city that had neither forgotten what their mother did, nor definitively decided what that was. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.